Hey, welcome back to Lessons from the Corner Office. I'm your host, Eric Turigian, and we have an amazing show for you today. As part of our fireside chat series, I have two guests that you're going to not want to miss. Matt Turnbull from the Team Performance Group and Bob Chiravelli from HR Strategies Group. We're going to have a conversation and get into the UAW automotive relationship. We're going to talk a little bit about negotiations, this strike that could be coming, and most importantly, we're going to talk about leading during chaotic times. Going to be a great show, so let's go ahead and jump on in. I'm going to turn it over to Bob and Matt. Let them introduce themselves. Bob, you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Bob Chiravelli. I'm a practicing labor lawyer and founder of Strategic Labor and Human Resources. And about every 3 or 4 years, I've become a real popular person as the UAW negotiates with what we used to call the Big Three. Today, we call the Detroit Three. And this time, it's a little different, Eric. And that's simply because we have a brand new leadership in the UAW. And they appear to be slightly more militant, actually a lot more militant than what we've seen up until now. As of today, the last day of the contract, that is at 11:59 tonight, it'll expire. It appears that the parties have still not had a meeting of the minds. And so what's on everybody's mind outside of that negotiations is how will the strike affect them personally and their businesses?
Yeah, it's a great point. That's what we really want to get into. And Bob, I was going through some of the material today and I was listening to Mr. Fain speak, and he is an impressive gentleman, and things are different. And I got flashbacks to all my days at World Headquarters going through bargaining sessions. And I was just talking to someone who I knew who went through those with me, and it's a lot different than it was. So I remember a lot of nights where we sat eating ice cream that they don't seem to be doing anymore. And hey, let's get Matt a chance to get here. So Matt, you want to go ahead and take it over?
Oh, thank you, Eric, and Bob, thank you as well. I'm Matt Turnbull, and I'm a registered corporate coach with Team Performance Group. At Team Performance Group, what we do is we specialize on making sure that teams can go the distance and to be able to get the best out of all the teams in their capacity and get their highest use. As it pertains to what we're talking about today, really the focus will be on how leaders of teams can manage their teams through chaos, perhaps, or even crises. And I look forward further into the call to be able to address some of those factors for everyone listening. Thanks.
Great. All right, let's take it now. Let's open up the Lessons from the Corner Office, and we're going to start. Bob, can you give us a little bit of sort of UAW, Big Three, Detroit Three, domestic auto, labor relations 101? Give a little bit of the history and a little bit of what's going on right now.
Okay, so they've been in negotiations since July. And what the UAW has told the Big Three is they're going to expect very large improvements to the labor agreement. And come the expiration, they will not be extending the negotiations, which means that technically come midnight, they will have the right to have an economic strike in whole or in part for any company or the whole industry. Now, what makes this a little different than most of them, as most people know, the UAW was involved in quite a large scandal with Stellantis. It used to be called FCA. And as part of that plea agreement, a monitor was placed over the UAW. And in a stroke of one pen, that monitor changed the way the union elected its leadership. And what we see today is the result of a one-member, one-vote leadership versus what used to be called the Ruther Caucus. And that's the biggest change to Labor Relations 101 as it relates to the UAW.
So I was talking to a client earlier this week, and we were in some all-hands meetings, and one of the questions that came up to me was, and people hear these terms, right? And that's part of what I like to do in the Lessons from the Corner Office is demystify some terms. So can you help us with a little bit of what is pattern bargaining, and why do we pattern bargain in the automotives?
So since the late 50s, right up until the Great Recession, there was a negotiations at one of the three autos that established the terms and conditions of the labor agreement. Once it was established at one of the companies, Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler, which is what they were called at the time, then the UAW would push to have the other two auto companies in their subsequent negotiations match the first agreement, hence the word pattern bargaining.
And when he says matches, it was matches, because I can remember being on the sourcing subcommittee, and we'll get into subcommittees here in a minute, but I remember GM was the target and they did their deal, and they literally walked in with the GM contract and handed it to us and said, go do a search and replace and change everything to Ford. And it's not quite that simple, but it's almost that simple, right?
Yes. Now, after the Great Recession, things changed substantially. There was still a modified pattern, but one of the big differences after the Great Recession is General Motors and FCA were not allowed to strike. The UAW was not allowed to strike those two places. That was not the case with Ford. And because the restructuring was significantly different with each one of them, the pattern modified itself.
That's awesome. And then let's talk a little bit about the structure. So I think that people don't understand when they talk about negotiations. Is it just, Bill Ford in the room with the head of the union? Is it the head of GM? Is it the head of HR? Can you talk a little bit about how the subcommittees work and what an economic subcommittee is, what they used to call the president's subcommittee?
Well, you know this as well as anybody since you were involved in it. But with companies like the autos, railway, some of the other very, very large companies that you see in various industries, they have a very sophisticated structure for labor relations and negotiations. And there'd be a main table negotiations at which most of the news would report on, but also they'd have a series of committees that were experts, staffed by subject matter experts from both the union and the company to help bring recommendations to the main table. And under this situation, clearly the heads of the companies and their boards had to ratify, just like the members had to ratify the agreements, but the day-to-day negotiations was put into the hands of the labor relations staffs at the autos and, of course, the UAW.
So I know this year they've made a change to where the economic discussions are happening in the main room. So they're no longer happening now in subcommittee.
Right, right. And that was one of the changes that the current UAW leadership has injected into this. It's a bit of a chaos, the way they've done it. But when you can't predict really what's going to be talked about on any one day, or there might be a change in the order of discussion, it really does stymie the negotiators on how to proceed.
Yeah, and it was a project plan, right? I can remember spreadsheets and schedules, and we kind of knew what the subject of each conversation was going to be, and we walked through it, and things happened in certain order and in certain ways, and it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. So now that we're in this new reality, and now we're here on September 14th, and it's about 4:40 Eastern time. What do we know today? What are we thinking? I don't want anyone to kind of extend themselves, but what are our guesses? What do we think could happen?
So let me weigh on this first. First off, yesterday in the news, we're not at the table, but in the news, the UAW indicated that today they would be indicating to the companies how they were going to strike them, which means were they going to have a series of variable strikes, rotational strikes, incremental strikes. And we've heard a new phrase used with this UAW called the stand-in strike. It was a play on the sit-in strikes of the late 30s. And I suspect what's going to happen is they are going to bring those particular locations into the negotiations in order to increase their leverage with the autos.
Yeah, I can remember, and I think you use a very important term there. So none of us are at the table, right? So we don't know. But I remember Bud McDougall, who's an old labor guy from Ford, UAW, Rouge Steel, Rouge Complex. He told me, he said, there's only two things that you know about negotiations. They always start and they always finish. Everything in between is open up for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So look, we're not going to pontificate too much. We're going to let the other talking heads do that about where this is going to end up or not end up. So let's just make an assumption. There's really three kind of potential outcomes. One is that they continue to work today and they find some thing that works for both parties and they get some settlement and we get an agreement and then they move from there and we figure out how to implement it. The second scenario is they see some progress, things are moving in the right direction. The parties agree to say, hey, look, let's just continue to operate. We'll operate under the agreements. There'll be expired agreements. There's different things we follow, don't follow, but we're not going to strike yet. And then there's this worst case scenario where they say, okay, that's it. We're going to start striking. Here's our pattern, or wherever it's going to be. Let's consider for a few minutes now. And I think this is where we want to hear a little bit too from Matt here is, let's say we do get to that last scenario and now they do walk out and now everything does get into turmoil and there's chaos. And look, this is not just the big three. This is not just the automotive. This is not just a supply base. A lot of people are watching this and a lot of people are hearing numbers like 20% and 40% and 32% and 4-day work weeks and, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on working America. Can we talk a little bit, Matt? What should leaders be doing right now to protect their teams and to try to get their teams ready should this kind of worst case scenario play out?
Well, I don't want to call it a worst case scenario quite yet, but normally when you talk about uncertainty or if there's something that's unsettled or an event that was unplanned for, leadership can certainly play an active role in calming down the workforce. So when you look at some of the elements, if there is a chaotic event occurring, or if there's an unforeseen event occurring, there are several steps that leadership can take to help make sure that there's a good transition or else there's calm brought back into an environment. The first thing that I would offer is that leadership should always be present when there's some sort of an event or chaos going on. Now that seems pretty simplified, but really what I mean by that is that you can't go into a bunker mentality and hide. You need to be visible. You need to be out and talking with your people and your employees, because if it's out of sight, out of mind, your team's going to be affected negatively by the fact that you were nowhere to be around. So being present is critical whenever you start. If I give an example of this, and it's going back, but it's timely, I suppose. Back when 9/11 occurred, I was an assistant manager for a brokerage firm in Chicago. And our branch manager was in fact in Midtown Manhattan during that week for an event and was out of the office back in Chicago. So when we watched as an office, the news breaking that the airplanes had hit the towers, for us, it was important to recognize that our operations and our trading departments were in one of those towers. And so we had a lot of uncertainty and certainly a lot of emotion tied into that. Now, the easiest thing to do would have been for us to kind of head back to our office and say, all right, we'll let you know what's going on. But we didn't. We went arm to arm, door to door to make sure that everybody was aware of what was going on and what we knew, because the second part of it is recognizing the issue. We wanted to deal with facts as we knew them. And admittedly, there's a lot of uncertainty or unknowns during these things, but being transparent is going to be a very critical part for leaders to really develop and to work through issues. And then when you have that uncertainty, remember that you can control what you can control. So as leaders, make sure your teams remember what the group's purpose is. Why are we coming to work to begin with in the first place? And make sure that people stay on that target, because you want to remain focused on the goals. So those are some of the core elements. And we did that making sure that people understood that there was a lot of uncertainty occurring back in Manhattan over several days, but our goals were still to serve our clients at that point. And we got people to just make the touches and the contacts to let people know that we were still one, most importantly, which I think was very critical, our employees and our clients at the time wanted to make sure we were just all right. And it really reinforced some strength that people do care about other people. And so we remained, that really fueled us to stay on top of our goals and stay on top of our purpose that way. And the other side of it was really, when you want to go as a leader, is to make sure that everybody is pitching in and to not let that go unnoticed. We appreciated all the efforts of the elements that got put in, and we recognized them because everyone was concerned. Everyone was empathetic about what was going on. And more than anything else, we wanted to ensure our team's safety. On 9/11, it was evacuating our building, making sure that everybody, despite their struggles, saying we can stick around, is to get them out so that they would be safe. And that came back to us with a lot of thanks later on, where people said, the management team really pushed us to do the right thing, not because we wanted to, but because we needed to. And leaders can lead. That's when you're needed more than anything else. So working through chaotic times like that, Eric, can really help calm some of the people out there.
What a poignant example, and timely and time bound here, and it's heartfelt. So we feel for you for having to lead through that, but we're proud of you that you were able to lead through that and lead people through that. One of the things we always talk about, all of us, three of us together, and CHRO Solutions drives this, and Team Performance Groups drives this, and Bob, your group drives this all the time in the marketplace, is that leadership effectiveness is one of the number one drivers of performance. So we start to think about the situation that we're in right now. How do we think about leadership effectiveness impacting the next few weeks? Now I'm turning it over to Bob, if you want to weigh in, or Matt, who wants to jump on it first.
So normally under these circumstances, we would always recommend start planning early. Well, at this stage of the game, early planning's out the window. So what leaders should be thinking right now, either if they have a prime negotiations that might be subject to a strike, or they might be have their business disrupted because of the auto strike, is what are mission critical events and who are key people that will be required to make sure the business is ongoing. The second part is some form of strategic communication. Clearly, if you're a union supplier or some kind of participant in the industry where you have a union, you're going to have to conform and comply with the policies and the labor agreement. If not, and you are a non-union facility, put yourself in the place of the employees and understand what they're going to need as you communicate what might happen in the next 2 days, 3 days, week, or month. I would say those are the two most important things right now in terms of a list of things to do.
Yeah, and Eric, if I can add there too, Bob, those are some great points. Empathy plays into this, but I always say when you ensure your team's safety, there are a lot of different methods, and I think it parallels what Bob was highlighting, is to make sure when there are uncertainties of what's going to happen, are we going to have to close down? Is there going to be some change that's in the near or short-term future? Is to make sure that resources are made available or reinforcing the existing resources that are available, so people don't feel like they've just been left to fend for themselves. Every organization, it doesn't matter what side of the labor table they're going to be, there will be resources that these people should be able to tap into and take advantage of. So again, from a leadership standpoint, I think it's critical to let them know that we've not given up or stopped caring, but in fact that we recognize that it will be unsettling perhaps, and that there are opportunities then to still gain or get help if it's necessary or needed, or give some direction.
Yeah, one of my clients requested that I be on site and talk to their employees, so I did that earlier in the week, and we had a very frank discussion, and we were very honest, and this is one of my questions to the team is, how do you answer that question when you don't have the answer? But let me just tell you this, the number one thing I heard after the meetings was, thank you for treating us like adults. I don't get your guys' reaction to that. And then a little bit about, how do you answer a question when you don't have an answer?
Well, I'll offer hopefully everyone is being treated with respect throughout any of these types of moments or events, because everybody deserves that. But when you don't have a clear-cut answer, there's no shame in being transparent either. If something is still in negotiation, you reference, they're behind closed doors and no one knows exactly so it's purely anyone's guess. Be direct with facts as we know them, and be as transparent as you can be. There's no benefit to trying to guess what could or what might happen if you're not directly in line to know. So I think you're served better to, again, recognize the issues, don't hide from them, but be transparent and direct to say, we don't know this yet, or we're waiting to get answers. And to your point about treating everybody as adults and with respect is paramount.
I would add one more thing to that. The whole area of strategic communications is a specialty. There are subject matter experts in this area. And if you don't have a clue how to do it, buy a clue. Reach out to an expert in the area that can guide you through the internal and external communications. Today, with the different lines of communications being so widely expanded because of technology, it's important that you have somebody who's done this more than once to help your workforce, help the people working at your company know that you're going to keep their best interests at heart as you keep the interests of the company at heart as well.
I think that couldn't have been said better. And, for those of us who have been up and down the road a few times, or, I come out of the auto industry, so they always say I got a lot of miles under my tires. We've seen things, and there's a lot of stuff that we've handled because we've probably handled it wrong one time in the past, and we saw the fallout of it, and now we can handle it a little bit differently. But Bob, I was going to throw this question out to you a little bit because I use this a lot. Can you talk about, because there's a lot of people that are going to deal with, there's going to be a lot of conversations people aren't used to dealing with going on right now. And a lot of these are governed by the National Labor Relations Board. Can you talk a little bit about tips and FO and how they're your friend?
Okay, so if you're in a union setting, dealing directly with the employee can be quite problematic from a legal standpoint. When you have a union, there is a certified bargaining representative. And I can't emphasize strongly enough that if you're going to be doing something that affects the terms and conditions of your employees, get with the union, give them some notice, some opportunity to respond, seek their ideas. In the non-union setting, assuming there's not an organizing drive, you have much more leeway. You can obviously make unilateral decisions. Those aren't as constrained under our federal type of labor law, but you still have to be cognizant that you're still behaving, you have to behave in this highly legislated area where, in addition to your own policies, you may have some legal parameters that you have to follow.
And so we used to always use the acronym TIPS and FO. Don't threaten, interrogate, promise, or surveil, right? And then FO is your friend. Use facts, use opinions, and use examples. Now, do not be like the manager who I knew one time and I had to support, who's went to someone and said, if I catch you at that union meeting or talking to that union representative, you're going to get fired. In my opinion, that will not work and you're not going to be protected. But for the most part, tips and FO. Yes, maybe you don't have a union, but you still have to be careful how you handle information. So I think, Bob's point of getting help is very poignant. So, hey, Bob, so someone says, I need some help, I need some labor support, a little bit about how they get a hold of you and things you can do.
Well, obviously they can call you and you would call me. Other than that, you can reach me at robert@hrstrategy.biz. And somehow we will find each other.
And Matt, Team Performance Group, and a group that I work very closely with as well. A little bit about what you guys can do and how they can get a hold of you.
Well, the easiest way is always, as Bob pointed out, through you, Eric, if they want to reach out to you first and foremost, and then you can connect us. But in the same way, my email is mturnbull, and I know it's coming across the banner, but mturnbull@teamperformancegroup.com. So we absolutely entertain anyone that's interested to talk, and we're happy to get back to you as quickly as we can.
Well, I want to say a special thank you to Matt and Bob, and I'll tell everybody, I'm going to give a little personal story real quick here. Bob is someone who, when I started this business, almost now 2 years ago, he took me, we went out to lunch one day, walked me through everything. His passion and support of me has been just instrumental in helping me kind of achieve what I've achieved. So not only a close friend, but a big, big supporter, but he told me, always take the coffee meeting. Always take the coffee meeting. So anyone who wants a question, wants to talk about something, I am available for coffee anytime, anywhere. We could do a virtual cup of coffee. We can meet, have a cup of coffee. I'd love to meet you, love to get to know you, love to see what you're about. As always, I'm Eric Turigan. I'm your host. This has been Lessons from the Corner Office, the CHRO Solutions, where we believe that the number one impactor of performance is leadership effectiveness, and we are going to help you make your leaders more effective so your teams can deliver on your visions. As always, remember, everybody, you make enough people's dreams come true, so will yours. We'll see you soon.